You're tuned into the hottest paranormal life show on YouTube, Into the Fringe, where we discuss lost civilizations, UFOs, cryptids, unsolved mysteries, megalithic structures, extraterrestrials, interdimensional portals, time skips, and more. Don't change that channel, because now you are leaving the mainstream and entering into the fringe.
Everyone can see and hear me.
Greetings, followers. It is I, Cardinal Sin, here with another episode of Into the Fringe. My mouse has been giving me a hard time recently. Anyway, we are on episode 24 of Into the Fringe, and I would like to take a moment to say hello to everyone in the chat. Maliaha Hire, the Time Prophet is here, and the Stream Elements bot is here, but not the Stream Elements tip jar. So if for any reason you should decide that you would like to tip me, you may do so through the PayPal link. And Don McDouglas is here. Hail. And Flying Brian Myers is here. Hello, sir. And I will go ahead and pop that link into the chat. Make sure I spell it right. So that's a 100% secure PayPal link. I don't see any of your credit card information. If you enjoy what I do, if you'd like to buy me a coffee, etc., you may do so there. And let me tell you what we have tonight on Into the Fringe. We have a really special double feature. Today we have both Walter Bosley and Christopher O'Brien, and I am thrilled beyond words, but I'll do my best. Walter Bosley is an investigator of historical occult mysteries, author of pulp fiction novels, and a screenwriter who has appeared on History Channel's Ancient Aliens. After 19 years in national security, Walter Bosley is a licensed private investigator in California, where he also runs his small press publishing company, Lost Continent Library, founded in 2002. Bosley has traveled much of the world, both on the job and off, including trips through Mexico and South America with David Hatcher Childress, which I haven't even asked him about. That's crazy. Walter Bosley was born in San Diego, California, and attended San Diego State University, where he earned a BA in journalism. He has been employed by the Federal Bureau of Investigation and is an inactive reserve officer in the U.S. Air Force, for which he served as a special agent of the AFOSI while on active duty, and then worked as a counterterrorism operational consultant for 6 years following military service. Bosley spends his time writing fiction and nonfiction, as well as investigating strange mysteries in between PI assignments. The latest news about Bosley's projects can be found at the following blogs: empireofthewheel.blogspot.com and lostcontinentlibrary.blogspot.com. Walter Bosley, welcome to Into the Fringe.
Hey, Gil, it's good to be back.
How are you, my friend?
Good. I'm glad that I had the timer on today, because it gave me an extra hour to get ready and try to iron out tech stuff. So,
how did it work out?
I'm still hearing me, but it seems to be working okay. As long as you guys aren't hearing me double speaking.
No,
Okay.
it's all on your end.
I'll figure that out for the next time.
I'll try and speak clearly and slowly.
Well, I can hear you clearly. Just give it a one count of beat after I finish. That way, my second voice won't be talking over you.
Gotcha. All right. Well, we have a lot to get to, so let's go ahead and pull up the questions, as it were. And of course, now I am suffering technical difficulties. My notes don't want to appear.
Well, I know out here we're having an earthquake issue.
Are
Hey,
you?
wait a minute. My other voice disappeared.
Must have been the earthquake.
That's interesting. Yeah, apparently people were feeling it up north. Now, the conventional wisdom is that when you have a long string of hot days in a row, like we've had for a month, and we're talking over 100 degrees, and it's dry that long, that, allegedly we have more earthquake activity. I've never actually looked into that to see if there's any validity to that. It's just been something that people have noticed when we do have earthquakes, that it seems to follow a string of hot days. But, I'm pretty sure there's earthquakes that have happened during the colder season, but something I'll have to look into.
We have some input from the chat. First, Flying Brian Meyer said echo on Walter's side pretty extreme. Then the Time Prophet said, Cardinal Sin, your mic is not echoing, but Walter is echoing. Then the Time Prophet said, echo has stopped now.
Yeah, I don't know what happened.
And Flying Brian Meyer says, sounds great, don't touch anything.
Exactly.
And this actually did happen last Sunday. So it may be entirely on my side. But apparently it's all 5x5.
There we go.
Now, if I could just get my dang notes, because I had some pretty cool questions.
I have to remember, since having this new microphone, that I don't have to yell anymore.
Yeah.
So I have to remind myself, this thing is wonderful. I love this. It's a Yeti Nano, and I can like you were saying earlier, I can do my FM radio guy voice and still be heard.
You can get your Venus flytrap communication voice, or you can sound like the captain from Futurama. I love that Billy West.
Yeah,
I can never remember the name of the captain, but he sounds like he's imitating Captain Kirk. Now, why is my... Oh, I'm on a Windows 10 box, that's why. I freaking hate Windows.
I was going to say, you knew it had to have something to do with a Microsoft product.
I fucking hate Windows 10. I started out on a Mac back in the day. Then I went to the Amiga.
Uh-huh.
And I stayed on the Amiga for a good long time, developed a really good, long, disgust for Microsoft after they stole just about everything from Amiga and Mac.
Well, for years, Flying Brian here will tell you, he was telling me, go Mac. And I did in the early 2000s, back when I was making great money and I could afford it. And I loved that thing. And as soon as I can justify the expense, my next laptop will be a Mac. And then I'll probably go with a desktop, or, just because I didn't have the idiotic problems when I use the Mac as I've had, using PCs. So
as a YouTuber, unfortunately, almost all of the the YouTube programs are Windows oriented. So I do have my notes up. So let's get rumbling. Okay, so can you tell us about the talk and the workshop that you gave at Contact in the Desert recently, just sort of in a general way?
No, not at all. It's entirely classified.
Oh, okay.
I'm kidding. They asked me, first of all, I really appreciated being asked to be involved with it. I was one of the many speakers that this year's theme was they wanted to get more research-based and alternative ideas infused into Contact in the Desert, instead of it being pretty much just an ETH show. And so
naturally you were the go-to guy.
Well, I was one of them because I do have alternative. I'm one of those that has alternative theories to the ETH. Although I think the ETH does legitimately explain a number of UFO cases, but they had read my books Shimmering Light and Origin, so they asked me to give a talk on that research. My main presentation was a little bit about partially about my breakaway civilization. I've started calling it breakaway society. My breakaway society research, from the perspective of how I think it is actually the historical thread leading up to the
from 1903 to NIMSA to the Nazi International.
From the 1850s through the 1890s airship mystery, then into that 1903 era, and how NIMSA, I think, became absorbed into the Nazi war machine. Mm-hmm. And then such and such. But then the remaining half of the presentation was my alternative hypothesis for Roswell, which I go into in my book. It's there's nothing in the presentation except some finer details and points that aren't in the book that presents the idea that Roswell might not have been. I don't think it was an ET incident at all, number one. Neither do I think it was weather balloons. But I propose the possibility that it was the United States' first attempt at manned space flight. And I know that just opens up, a barrel of monkeys and a whole bunch of questions, which I think I answer sufficiently in the book Shimmering Light. But yes, the basic gist of it is, right after World War II, you've got all the paperclip rocket scientists, geniuses, with the American rocket scientist geniuses all in the same place at the same time. You've got all of the paperclip German aviation medicine specialists, which there's a whole story behind that. That is what really drove Operation Paperclip, were the aviation medicine guys and the bomb guys and the
aviation med. I don't think I've even thought about that.
That's the thing. Aviation medicine, if you're going to put people in space, what do you got to do? You got to keep them alive. So aviation medicine, what people don't realize is, as vague as that sounds and as bland and vanilla as that sounds, aviation medicine from the beginning was all about human beings surviving in space. And the whole thing about how that applied to high altitude aircraft was the product along the way. But when you go back to the 1910s and the 1920s and definitely the 1930s, all these aviation specialists, particularly in Germany, their main objective always was to put man in space. And we got 58 of those guys, plus the rocket scientists. So here you have the aviation medicine specialists, the guys who are all about keeping humans alive in space, the German ones, plus our guys. We had some of the best in the world too. Sure. So they're all in the same place there, New Mexico, with the German and American rocket engineers. They've got all the secrecy they could ask for, all the resources, all the money. So when you have these guys,
plus all the nuclear, atomic scientists,
that too. The guys working on alternative propulsion and things like that. But when you have all these guys who really, from the get-go, the rocket guys and the aviation medicine guys, they're all about putting man in space. You got them all in the same place at the same time, with resources and secrecy, what do you think they're going to try? Do you really think they're not going to try putting some people in space? I argue that that would be naive to think that they wouldn't try it. And it would be really naive to think, well, they couldn't do it if, they weren't allowed. I mean, these guys basically, in 1947, it was, go forth and do your thing. And
right.
I think this was their thing. And anyway, I get into more details, the context of the history and all that, to argue for my hypothesis. I could be wrong. Of course I could be wrong. But that's the gist of what the main presentation was about. And the other presentation, I got to have a little more fun with that, I guess you'd say.
You did a total of 2?
I did a presentation and what they call a workshop. Now, the workshop...
And you were on a panel.
And I was on a panel, which I'm sure we'll talk about that. That was interesting. But in the workshop, I won't go into too much detail there. The workshop is one of those things where the attendees, you pay an extra little fee to watch the workshop. In this case, everything was online. It was the first year they did it online. But you pay extra for a workshop. A lot of conferences do this. And what a workshop is in my case, I gave a talk on my own personal UFO sighting experience, and I went into
which
the context.
I don't think I've heard, by the way.
Oh, I can talk about the UFO sighting here, no problem. But in the presentation, I get into the context of the what was going on with me at the time I had this experience, and the context of what I think it might have been and the source of it. And that's the part I won't go into too much, because that presentation is still live. And I talk about things I've never put in a book or never discussed publicly in that workshop presentation. Which
and presumably that will eventually be available to the general public.
Yeah, eventually they'll put it out there. Probably several months from now, they'll put it out on their either their YouTube or whatever platform they're using.
Do you know whether you'll have access to it to put on your channel, or?
Well, by the time, as far as directly, I'm going to ask them, because I can't recall, or I'll look in the contract. I can't recall that thing, but obviously by the time they put it on YouTube, I can just link up that link, spread that around. But I will say this: I do not think my UFO experience was anything to do with extraterrestrials per se. But there are some elements in there that are associated with the idea of extraterrestrial intelligences. So it's in the mix. It's in the mix, but
you seem to be hedging, Mr. Bond.
No. Well, I'm trying not to. I'm trying not to give away too much, because it's still kind of a live thing for the folks who paid that extra.
Sure.
I don't really want to. I kind of want to honor their investment in.
Absolutely. I was just curious if eventually it would be something in a couple of years or whatever.
Oh yeah, definitely. Within, I would say, definitely by next year, it'll probably be available out there, and I can talk about it all the livelong day. But it really is an interesting presentation, because I did some extra research, and I had done some more recent analysis based on data that I had very recently collected. So I really enjoyed that workshop presentation. But then again, there was also the panel that I was on. Yes,
and I understand that. Along with Richard Dolan and some of the names we might expect, there were a couple of people maybe you didn't expect to be on the panel.
Well, there was Steve Bassett, who was the moderator, who did an excellent job as the moderator.
Yeah,
Linda Moulton Howe, as you know, Richard Dolan, Grant Cameron, Nick Pope, and there was also Danny Sheehan, Lou Elizondo's lawyer is how he's being billed these days, and David Adair. Yeah. Yeah.
And I guess that's where we'll leave it.
Oh, well, no. I mean, I'll answer questions. Was there?
It seemed like you were surprised that he was there.
Well, here's the funny thing about that. Literally, a couple of nights before, the day before or something, I was doing a live stream, I think, and somebody asked me what I thought of David Adair and his theories. So I said, I'm vaguely familiar. So I Googled him right there while I was on my live stream, and I looked, and I said, I see a credibility issue here with
right.
This stuff.
And this had to do with his alleged flying of F-4 Phantom jets while he was in the Navy.
It wasn't just that. No, it has to do with his secret stuff he allegedly, was involved with out in Area 51 and all this stuff. The F-4 Phantom jet thing popped up during the panel. And you can probably, if you see the panel, you see my screen go on, because you're right. I immediately jumped on and Googled that to see if there was anything in his, resume or personal bio that indicated he had been in the Navy, because he talked about when he was flying F-4 Phantoms for the Navy. Well, I mean, of all the other things he'd done, I didn't recall, and I couldn't find at that time where he'd been, a United States naval officer or aviator. And there he said it, flying F-4 Phantoms. And so, I don't know. Maybe it's buried somewhere in his bio, but that there are one is very well known, but there's a couple of websites or YouTube channels alone dedicated to this whole issue of the Valor thing. And these days it doesn't, it's not a smart thing to be claiming military service that ain't true. So I hope
it's easily discovered.
Yeah, I hope that maybe it's true, and I just couldn't find it at the moment. But the other stuff to me is in that category of where we've had a problem in ufology for the last 5 years, and that's with these so-called insiders, or the alleged whistleblowers.
Well, that goes back to William Milton Cooper. Was that his name?
Yeah, Bill Cooper.
He was promoting the idea that he was an intelligence operative, which he was not. And became a paranoid, and eventually brought down a rain of bullets onto him.
Yeah.
So,
and the community, or at least a fair portion of it, particularly the conspiracy community, just ate his stuff up like it was ice cream with a big.
Oh, I remember. Yeah, the hour of the time.
And this seems to, for the last 30 years, it seems like this insider thing. There's just enough people, just a critical mass of people that just fall for this insider whistleblower stuff and can't get enough of it. And there's just enough of these people that it ends up putting these guys in the center ring, giving them the big spotlight. And invariably, they turn out to be BS artists. It turns out to be highly questionable what they're claiming. And people still just seem to, love it and want more. And just as soon as one gets exposed, here comes another one. And the same people that are saying, that darn guy who just got exposed, oh, but look at this guy, he's different. Well, no, he never turns out to be different.
And if it's not a guy that claims he's been in the military or an intelligence operative or what have you, it's Sean. What's his name? The guy that said that he was had an inside track on stock market stuff, and eventually went to court. And
Sean David Morton.
Sean David Morton, thank you. I can't believe I don't remember his name, because I was at the Bay Area UFO Expo, and I ruined the footage his cameraman was taking by standing behind him the entire time. And every time his cameraman moved, I would go 180 degrees the other way. But yeah, you've got guys like that, and people just, my girlfriend at the time, after seeing his talk about, all the earthquakes that were going to happen in the Bay Area, wanted to move, and I was just exposing her to sort of, here's what a UFO convention is like, and she was completely smitten, and I'm like, are you serious? The stuff that these people peddle is just crazy. So yeah, you have to be very discriminating.
And one thing that I recall Morton doing was during Richard Hoagland presenting at, I can't remember if it was Laughlin or if it was the Expo in Los Angeles, but during Hoagland's presentation, I recall Morton pretty much being right outside the door to the hall that Hoagland was speaking in, and, gathering people around and him giving an impromptu, kind of lecture there, right outside of Hoagland's talk, which,
right.
They had to close the doors because of that. But, I'm thinking, wow, you couldn't gather an audience somewhere else so that, the people in the hall aren't hearing, somebody else give a lecture.
Actually,
right outside the door.
I remember Christopher O'Brien saying something very similar about Sean David Morton having done that to somebody else, and it completely stole the crowd away from whoever it was who was talking, Whitley Strieber or whoever, and then he was in the hall, and the entire workshop was listening to him. And
it's rude.
That's not cool. Get your own panel.
Exactly. And if you can't get your own panel, well, what does that tell you? Maybe go about what you're doing in a different way. Maybe not be a BS artist.
Exactly.
And here's the thing. And I'm certainly one of these people. I have hypotheses. I have speculations. I speculate all the live long day, and I admit it. I also say, hey, I could be wrong. And we know there's people in the field that just will not admit they could be wrong at all. They would rather go with that implication that, they know they're right. But I admit that I could be wrong. And here's the thing. There's a difference between people out there with their speculations and hypotheses and a BS artist, right? The honest person is going to say, this is a speculation. This is what I based it on. This is what I think. I could be wrong. And then the BS artists, which these insiders generally are, and the alleged whistleblowers generally are. They're the BS artists. So unfortunately, we have, for a while, we had this certain percentage of people that were equating people who just offer, alternative hypotheses and speculations, honest speculations. They were equating them with BS artists. And, first of all, it's not true. It's not accurate. It's not fair. But thanks to the BS artists, this was happening. I think there's more people that are beginning to discern the difference again. And that's entirely because if you're going to offer speculation and hypothesis, just admit that that's what it is. Be honest. Because you know what? A real insider, somebody who would be a real insider on this stuff, no offense to any of us in this community, whether you're in the center of the stage or out on the fringe of the backstage like me, you know what? A real whistleblower insider is not going to go to the UFO community. I'm sorry. Right. They're going to go to the major media outlets. They're going to go to a bigger audience. They're not going a bigger mainstream audience.
Absolutely.
They're not going to go to anybody in the UFO community. The real thing in that regard is not going to happen there. But
I mean, occasionally you'll have guys like John Lear who used to gather a really big following at like the Bay Area UFO Expo might be the biggest of the UFO conventions that I've ever been to. There may be bigger ones in New York or something like that, but back in the day, he certainly attracted a large group, but he also spewed a lot of bullshit, like you said.
Yeah, and the thing is, again, first of all, our community, basically, there's a reason we tag on alternative research, because I think it's a given when you get into these subjects. It should be a given that there's going to be some outside of the box thinking. There's going to be some, hey, let's speculate, because that's part of the fun, right? Usually when you're a kid, when you're younger and you get into UFOs, for example, which for a lot of people is the gateway drug into other things. For me, it was that way. You get into the appeal of the UFO discussion is the fact that it is a discussion that allows for speculation. As long as everybody knows that's what we're doing, as long as when you offer a speculation, again, like I said, you're being honest. And so I think that's part of the territory and that's okay, because thinking outside of the box sometimes is where you can find those threads or those nuggets of evidence or truth or whatever you need to maybe get to, the truth of something. So
I really enjoy your nugget of truth idea, and I spent a great deal of time front loading, I guess you would say, last night, or preparing for today, and I was absolutely 100% in when you said, hey, this is speculation, this is what I do. This is the Walter Bosley channel. That's what we do here, and that doesn't make you any less, interesting or viable or professional or what have you. I mean, there's evidence, and then there's connecting dots, and then there's filling in the details. And I think that you do that really well. I mean, for fuck's sake, you're a private investigator with 20 years experience in the field. If we can't trust you to say, this is what I've put together, take it or leave it, who can we trust?
Well, but the key is, as long as I'm being honest with you about where what I'm saying comes from. That's why I like to say, well, my books present historical facts that are documented, but also the context, right? And then it presents the questions that naturally arise from the holes and gaps in that documented factual history. And then from there, I say, okay, let's try to answer those questions. Here's possibilities. Now, here's what I think. Here's my analysis, and that's all it is analysis. And I think that's a perfectly legitimate way to go, as long as you're being honest about it. And that's what I do. Is I try to be as honest as it's what I do. I'm just honest about it. So and
as long as we're being honest about stuff, let's go ahead and dive right in.
Sure.
Do you think there was a pre-Columbian Templar presence in North America?
Yes. I think it makes perfect sense. The idea that the first Europeans, were Columbus and his crew in 1492. Remember, there's some speculation that Columbus did a secret voyage here himself in 1485, so that by 92 he knew.
I did not know that.
Yeah, the 1485 is something that some scholars, in our field and historical, legitimate historians, as opposed to what people would consider people in our field suspect
speculationists. Is that a good word for it?
Speculators, right?
Yes.
Yeah, there's the issue of he might have come in 1485, but then there's the stuff about the Vikings. Now, look at the logic of it. Take out your map of the world.
Sure.
The Scandinavians, the Vikings.
All they have to do is hug the coast all the way here.
Yeah, right. They just hop land masses, right, and then there they are, and that's a no-brainer. Okay.
Yeah. Not to mention the actual evidence of Viking runes and that kind of thing.
Exactly.
That's pre-Columbian.
A 12-year-old in a sabbat could do basically what the Vikings did. Hopping the landmasses. So therefore, if we are going to entertain the idea of the Vikings doing it, well, why not this guy from the Orkney Islands and Templars doing the same thing, essentially, or having found out. And there's the issue also of the Fourth Crusade, where they decided, forget the Middle East, we'll just sack Constantinople. Right. And the Imperial Archives, which was known to have received some of the stuff that dispersed from the Library of Alexandria upon its destruction. Some of the things that were saved from that ended up in the Imperial Archives. And so we're talking all that missing legendary information about the world before our history was written. This is stuff that the Knights Templar and the Teutonic Knights and a couple other orders got their hands on during the Fourth Crusade, even though the Templars themselves did not engage in the actual sacking activities. They were in the background helping provide resources, and they were some of the beneficiaries. So right there, they say that the secret cartographic tradition, meaning the maps of the lost civilization, which would explain the Piri Reis map, where Piri Reis got his information when he did his 15th century map and so forth. But, if the Templars did indeed get their hands on the maps of the world, then there you go. There's another resource they would have had to know what was, across the Atlantic Ocean. So if they have this info, you think they're not going to try it? Of course they're going to try it. And if they knew that their buddies, remember, the Orkney Islands belonged to Norway before it belonged to Scotland, before it belonged, to the United Kingdom. And so their cousins, their Norwegian cousins, their Viking cousins, of course they, Henry Sinclair and them probably learned all about what the Vikings had seen, when they went to Vinland and all that. So it just makes too much sense within even the known historical context. And then when you go, into the Templar history and everything, yeah, absolutely. I think look, there's evidence that Columbus himself was a post-persecution Templar, what we call Hidalgo de Sangre, Templar by lineage. Knight by lineage, but it was used to apply to people who were known or believed to be Knights Templars. Okay, that's really what the application Hidalgo de Sangre, what its usage was. And when you have a guy who, on his ships, emblazons the Templar cross across his sails for all the world to see, right? Now, remember,
that's not a dead giveaway or anything.
That's not a dead giveaway. And this was still in an era where the what is it? The symbols and the paraphernalia of the Templars was still supposed to be kind of outlawed. And yet there's Columbus, kaboom, there's the Templar cross right there.
Right.
In case you hadn't figured it out, that's what this is about. So I'm in that school of thought that thinks Columbus absolutely benefited from Templar knowledge of the Americas.
So let's delve in a little bit into this Templar treasure vaults in the New World. Why do you think there may be Templar treasure vaults in North America, and from whom were they running?
Well, primarily they were running from the Vatican. Okay, the Vatican, and of course, for a while, naturally, the French crown, because those two, the
two popes,
the Pope and the French king, they were in cahoots,
and the anti-pope.
Yeah, and it goes back to the Albigensian. See, the Templars knew something was wrong.
The Albigensian heresy, is that what you're going to say?
The Albigensian Crusade, when the Cathars were all, genocided, slaughtered, and they refused to participate in that because they pretty much were reading what was going on. It's like, okay, this is essentially what they want to do to us, but by not participating, which was a very right choice for them, but still by not participating, they knew, okay, now we've put the target on our backs. So I personally think they were preparing, because in 1307, when the persecution came, the arrest order, their ships and their treasures were too instantly gone for this to have been unexpected and so spontaneous. So
and is this common historical knowledge, or is this your summation?
Oh, no. It's known that when they were arrested, that
everything had gone up in smoke.
Yeah, their fleet had fled. Now we know where a lot of them went. They went up into Scotland.
Right.
And but yeah, their riches and their wealth at the time of their arrest, I think the persecutors, the French and the Vatican agents, got their hands on some of it, but not nearly all of it. And there has been really good analysis of the golden age of European piracy, because there's, when you're talking piracy around the world, there are different histories, different cultures of piracy. But as far as what we think of pirates when we think of Pirates of the Caribbean, all that stuff, that's the European era of piracy. That actually began. There is a very strong argument that points out that that age of European piracy actually was a Templar reaction to the persecution. And they point to the fact that the skull and bones, the original skull and bones flag, and any variation of it was, that, as we know, became a symbol in Freemasonry. And the Templars being directly involved in the rise of Freemasonry after their persecution and then into the Age of Enlightenment and all that, it looks like that what happened was the Templars, who had that really impressive fleet, they began a maritime war. It's interesting. They would only attack ships of the Catholic nations. And that was a clue that those who have analyzed all this and laid out this hypothesis that it was the Templars initially doing this. And then when you look closer at European pirate culture, there's almost a Masonic thing going on there, subculture, which again, if this is a product of Templar influence, that's another clue that the Templars really were the origin of this era of, the classic European pirates. So, we know that their fleet got away before the French and the Vatican could catch them. And we know that they didn't get their hands on all the wealth and stuff. So these things had to go somewhere. The easiest explanation is they pretty much suspected something was going to happen, so they had this stuff loaded up on the ships, and off they sailed. So if they had been going to the Americas since the days of the Fourth Crusade, sometime after the Fourth Crusade, or starting with Henry Sinclair, then gosh, if you want to keep your valuables and your all this special stuff away from your enemies who are all over Europe, take it to this land that you're not telling everybody about. At that time,
and they acted as if they had been followed because they went westward.
Yeah. They went westward, and they were very cautious. So to answer your question, without going around the barn about it, is it was essentially the Vatican, their Vatican enemy, and any of the Catholic nations, that were sided with the Church, quite frankly. So
whoever might persecute them further.
Whoever had a problem with the Templars, that's who they were fleeing from, but at the same time working against.
These treasure vaults, what are in the vaults? What do you think the treasure was?
Well, a lot of people have hypothesized about that. And remember, this is all speculative and hypothetical.
Sure.
Anybody who talks about it, regardless of whatever evidence they have so far, it is still theoretical. It's still hypothetical.
Well, like I said, what do you think was in those treasure vaults?
I think, of course, monetary wealth. I think whatever mineral wealth they had, whatever stores of gold, silver, precious gems, whatever, that kind of thing obviously would have been part of it. But primarily, I think what they were really concerned with vaulting and keeping away from their enemies were the certain precious relics, whatever precious relics that they had acquired or found. That's what we're talking about. Now, that's a whole discussion. Did they have the Holy Grail? Did they have the Lost Ark of the Covenant? Did they have, as I say, Joan of Arc's sword, her special sword?
What is the sword of Joan of Arc?
Oh, that's a whole story to begin with. But
briefly, if you can make it a brief.
In a nutshell, Joan of Arc, she carried this very special sword, which you got to remember, Joan of Arc claimed to be in contact with three spirits, and one of them was Saint Catherine of Alexandria.
There's a rule of three.
Yeah, and that gives you a clue as to who Saint Cathy actually was, the goddess Hecate. Anyway, that's part of the long version. So Saint Cathy leads her to this sword, okay, which a researcher named Lance Bernard has connected to Charles Martel. It might have been Charles Martel's sword, which was forged from a meteorite. Anyway, so she...
Interesting.
Yeah, Joan of Arc says she was led to the sword, which was buried behind an altar in the church of St. Catherine of Alexandria in Fierbois, France. She digs up this sword, cleans it off, and every battle she rode into that she carried this sword, everybody noticed the sword. It was this amazing sword, and she never lost a battle. It was like King Arthur with Excalibur. And I go into a possible connection about that in my book, Secret Missions, The Hidden Legacy of Old California.
And you've got 4 Secret Missions book, and 5 is on its way?
5th is on the way, yeah. So this sword, when Joan of Arc was captured, she was not carrying this sword. If you go and you look at her trial, they were obsessed. We're talking the church interrogators, okay, the panel that had her on trial, and her English enemy who was pushing the trial panel most of all to find out where the sword was. The English were obsessed with that sword. The members of the church interrogation team were obsessed with the sword. When you look at the transcript, and this is amazing, the transcript of her trial is available. They kept asking her, where's the sword? Where's the sword? And she played ignorant. I don't know. I gave it to my brothers. Well, in my book, long story short, I argue that one or both of her brothers were probably post-persecution Templars. And I argue that this sword was taken to the Americas.
And when she says my brothers, was she referring to her like flesh and blood brothers?
Yes.
Biological?
Yeah. They were in the army. They fought with her. Yeah. And I think one or both of them were Templars. I think that's how the sword... Now, the long version of the story I go into in my book, the first Secret Missions book. I go into the actual detailed description of the sword. I explain why this may have been the same sword as, or the same type of sword as Excalibur from Arthurian legend. I explain the possible scientific metallurgical breakdown. Thanks to this researcher Lance Bernard, I recommend you look at his thing on the Sword of Joan of Arc, and I go into why this sword might have been so special, and why the English and the church and them wanted it so badly, because they saw it as a very special, powerful relic. And it's to me it's a very interesting, but the most interesting aspect of Joan of Arc's story. And they wouldn't have wanted the church or England to get their hands on this relic.
What is the shrine to Hecate in downtown Riverside all about?
Well, good question. I'm still trying to exactly answer that one myself, but I had been doing research and investigation on my Empire of the Wheel books since 2007, and a couple of years into that, I was investigating a spot in downtown Riverside, a particular intersection where my associate Seshari, who I've talked about a lot, provides me with maps of telluric current, gravity anomaly kind of ley line configurations. And there's an intersection in downtown Riverside at this particular...
Now, let me interrupt you.
Yeah.
What are telluric currents?
Telluric current is a very natural energy that it's scientific, it's a fact. It runs through the earth, through the terrain. It's a very low frequency, but it has scientific and technological applications. And the telegraph industry, which was started by the railroads in the mid-19th century, they were among the first of the modern industries to take advantage of telluric current. It's a really interesting history. And Seshari, and I agree with this, but Seshari and I argue that you can identify where these kinds of energies flow if you can use the geomorphology of the planet, read the actual formation of the terrain, and you can better identify where these energies are flowing because they follow certain patterns and designs and such. And he has provided me with these maps, which I've talked about a lot and shown, and it's all through my books. But I was investigating an intersection of this energy in downtown Riverside, and it made me laugh because I'd been into this for a couple of years, and I happened to look up at the original county court building in downtown Riverside, built in, you'll like this, 1903. And on the, let's see, it's the northwest corner. They have statuary on the corners of this building, but on the northwest corner, they have statues of 3 female figures. Okay, there's a young woman and an older woman, and they're kind of kneeling down, and in between, standing, is a figure that looks like Athena, but like a Grecian goddess, and this is the only corner with statuary that at the foot of the goddess figure is a wheel, like a cogged wheel. Okay, now I'm standing on the street at the corner of this building. I go to the property of the court, and on the corner where you can stand there down on the street by the sidewalk and look up at this, there's this circular part of the sidewalk comes to this circle, a cement circle, and in front of you is a little patch of rose garden. Now, in my research, roses have an association to this syncretic, which means not real, essentially. Saint Catherine of Alexandria, who was actually made up of whole cloth to cover for veneration of the goddess Hecate. Okay, roses are associated with both Catherine of Alexandria and Hecate, and there's roses planted, right there on a circle. And Saint Catherine's other name is Saint Catherine of the Wheel, and one of Hecate's main symbols is the wheel. So you're standing on this circle. There's roses, and you're looking up on the corner of this building, and there's 3, which Hecate is a triple aspect goddess. Number 3 is her main number. Okay, 50 and 100 are linked.
Again, the rule of 3.
Yeah, the rule of 3. And there, the goddess figure is the one with the wheel at her feet. And on no other corner or portico or whatever of that building do you see the wheel. They put it right there on that corner. They put the rule of 3 triplicate goddess figure, essentially Hecate. They've put a circle on the ground there. There is no circular feature in the walk path on any other corner there at that building. And it happens to be facing where Seshari is identified for me, an intersection, before I ever saw this, an intersection of this telluric current, this natural gravity anomaly telluric current energy. So it's my suspicion, speculation, hypothesis, that whoever built that court building was familiar with the principles involving Hecate and all that stuff, and probably was aware of this intersection of energy, and that's why they placed this, what I call a Hecate shrine, on that corner of the building, facing directly to that alleged intersection of this energy.
And how are telluric currents different from ley lines?
Okay, a ley line is something that is a usually straight line, but it's a path that is laid down by people to connect, to lead you from one sacred spot to another sacred spot. So a ley line technically is something that is a very much human construction and such, but it's very often and usually associated with sacred sites, and it's the sacred sites that tend to be located on these energy spots, on these gravity anomaly energy lines. So ley lines are just pathways created by people that are linked to these natural energy patterns where sacred sites like ancient temples and other things are located. So there is an association by context between ley lines and these energy lines.
Gotcha. And hello to Mr. Christopher O'Brien.
Sounds like he uses Microsoft too.
Hear me, or yes. And so we will delve further into your the questions that I have for you. What is so special about Mount Rubidoux, and why do you think there is a temple or vault inside it?
Oh, again, keeping it short. Basically, in my research, I learned about the belief that there was some type of sacred tomb, as it was called, inside of Mount Rubidoux. This was believed by our local native cultures here, the native tribes, and also the Latino community in Riverside. And so it kind of started there. And then in my research, when, again, Sesheri and I identified this natural energy pretty much running down the middle of the ridge, the backbone, so to speak, of Mount Rubidoux in downtown Riverside. You had that, and it basically matched the curve of the Fibonacci spiral, and it goes down and connects to another site, which I personally had a very strange experience with. It was all these factors in my Empire of the Wheel investigation that, again, going back to my nugget of truth, kind of where there's smoke, there's fire. Right. I think if the natives believed there was some type of sacred tomb inside Mount Rubidoux, could there be some truth to that? Could that have been some type of vault? So that's why I suspected, okay, the Templars, with their secret knowledge, maybe they were able to, I would think they were able to read the topography and geomorphology the way my guy does, Sesheri, and they could identify where these, energies flowing through. And the idea is perhaps they're placing these vaults in connection with, this energy grid network through the terrain, and that's why they would have selected Mount Rubidoux, and the fact that it's, the biggest hill in downtown Riverside, and such and so forth. And then some of the other weird things about Riverside, interesting things in its history, are either on Mount Rubidoux or connected to it. So I began to, because there seemed to be a preponderance of stories about Rubidoux in this esoteric arcane history context, that's why I suspect that that's where one of these Templar vaults may have been.
And what are the Black Madonnas?
What the heck? Oh gosh, let me turn off my sorry about that. That was my phone.
That's all right.
Those are what they are dark, either in stone or wood, but they're literal dark versions of the Madonna and Child. Okay. And they have a very interesting past that may connect them to other traditions. There is a connection of St. Catherine of Alexandria, who I know as Hecate, and the church knew as Hecate, essentially as Hecate, with the Black Madonna tradition, especially in Montreal. Now, Montreal is where you have the Black Madonna tradition, Hecate, and the Templars all converging, because there are researchers that point out that Montreal, before the modern city, was very likely a settlement founded by Templars.
And designed by Templars.
Yeah, the whole thing. There's supposedly a Templar association with Montreal. There are literal, I think there's 1 or 2 churches that have Black Madonna figures in them. And then, of course, St. Catherine / Hecate is in place names and streets, all over it. And it looks like the Black Madonna issue is what I mentioned before, the word syncretic, where you take the church would lay a Catholic veneer over something ancient to Catholicize it, and it's
pagan,
called syncretism. Yeah, if they know they're not going to be able to really eliminate the pagan veneration, what they do is they just put a Catholic mask over it so they can feel better about it, and they tell the pagans, hey, go ahead and venerate Hecate or whoever, but call her Saint Catherine and do it in the Catholic way. That way we can, both live in the same house. You know what I mean?
Interesting.
Yeah. So that's basically or syncretism is used to hide your actual veneration from the persecution of the church, which I think in the case of voodoo, that's why they did that with some of the voodoo gods and goddesses, giving them the names of saints. That's so they could stay out of trouble with, the maniacal inquisitors of the day.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and that's how the Santeria gods / entities factor in.
Yeah. Yeah.
What can you tell us about Ambrose Bierce's destination Carcosa?
That is the topic of my 3rd Secret Missions book. And Ambrose Bierce, in my opinion, definitely fits within my Secret Missions milieu, meaning, historical figures that something about their activities in their life indicates to me that they were involved in some clandestine agenda that had to do with, maybe arcane sciences, lost history, that kind of thing. Now, Ambrose Bierce is very famous for having, ridden across the bridge from El Paso into Mexico in 1913 and never being seen again. And some people, of course, claimed that, he was shot in the Mexican Civil War. And the evidence for that, the more people look into that, the thinner and essentially zero the evidence for that appears to be. He said numerous times in letters that his intention was to go into South America, and yet that gets ignored. But basically, Ambrose Bierce, before disappearing, is famous for being an American writer. He was a journalist. He wrote The Devil's Dictionary. He's known for that. He also wrote...
I own a copy, and I love The Devil's Dictionary.
Yeah, and I think it's the occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, which is kind of one of the first Twilight Zone.
Made into an episode of The Twilight Zone.
It made into an episode of The Twilight Zone, and I argue that from the literary perspective, between the Owl Creek Bridge story, between his famous story, less famous story, An Inhabitant of Carcosa, which influenced, supernatural literature after him.
Sure.
I argue that Ambrose Bierce was actually the literary creator of the concept of the Twilight Zone. I think that Rod Serling, he really propelled it forward, the concept, in a fantastic, amazing way. But the guy who really created that literary concept we know of is, we call generically that Twilight Zone, that place where weird things happen. That was Ambrose Bierce, not even Edgar Allan Poe. That was Ambrose Bierce with Owl Creek Bridge and Inhabitant of Carcosa alone. You could argue that. But, of all the things he wrote, half or more of them were about weird topics. The guy was fascinated with the strange things. He was fascinated with mysterious disappearances. He was fascinated with, just weird things. And
kind of Fortean stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And yet he seems to be most celebrated he is legitimately considered the best of the Civil War veteran authors on the Civil War. And people focus on that, or the Devil's Dictionary, or they focus on his being, kind of a grouchy curmudgeon as a journalist, and of course his disappearance. But so I, looking into this, I thought, here's the thing: as much as he wrote about other things, there's a lot about him that we don't know, and there's certainly stuff with his disappearance, and there's just by virtue of where he was at certain times and who he knew, there's an implication that he might have known a lot more about the airship mystery than he ever let on. In fact, he was there in San Francisco when this 1890s airship mystery was going on, and all he wrote was this kind of half-hearted article, essentially, well, if man were, it kind of had that attitude, if man were supposed to fly, he'd have wings kind of attitude. And yet that didn't make sense, because the airship mystery that was going on right there where he was at the time was his bailiwick. That would have been right up his alley. And for him not to say anything said to me, that implies to me that he knew more than he ever let on. And then when you couple that with his disappearance, that's it is indeed the most speculative of my Secret Missions series, but that's only because Bierce didn't give us much to go on. That's what that is.
I'm especially curious about what the connection between Hecate and Isis is, and what are the Tuatha De Danann?
Well, the Tuatha De Danann are. There's two ways to answer that. There's the anthropological view, and then there's the folkloric view. The anthropologic view. Yeah, the anthropologic view, you can find that. You can look that up. It's basically that these tribes from either Viking tribes or Mesopotamia, take your pick, even though those are two distinctly, opposite ends of the earth there, came and invaded ancient Ireland. And because this was such a shock, this was pumped up and they were mythologized into these, this amazing culture. I argue that anything to do with Mesopotamian ships and the tribe of Dan and any connection to any other cultures on Earth, the anthropological view, in my opinion, all that does is better explain the result of the influence and presence of this Tuatha De Danann after they arrived. So the anthropological view is legit, but it's not complete. And it does no way answer what the lore says. And the lore says this race of beings came from the sky with a great tumult, on a cloud, and landed on a mountaintop. Okay, the anthropological view tells you, their ships came and landed on the shores, and there were smoke from fires on shores, and that explains that.
And this is the difference between the beach and the mountain.
Thank you. Exactly. It's so the anthropological, the humanists who always want to explain everything, and they want to rain on everyone's parade. They arrived in ships on a shore, regular boats, and no, they didn't. It says they arrived from the sky on a mountaintop. Why are you changing things? But that's all the revisionist, material scientists. That's what they do. But they came from the sky and they landed on this cloud with great tumult on the top of a mountain. Okay, and they were advanced beyond the Irish tribes, and they defeated them in battle. And there's the story that the Fomorians came and defeated them, and that drove the Tuatha underground, and they disappeared for a while, and they came back. And here's the thing: I think what there is a mixing of the alleged Tuatha that were defeated. I argue what they were the local Irish tribes that had allied beneath the banner of the Tuatha, and it was they who were defeated by the Fomorians, and so forth. But the actual Tuatha, I suspect, I go with the idea that they came from another world or dimension.
Mm-hmm.
And
these turned into the Irish gods, the pagan gods,
the fairies, actually, more specifically,
fae folk.
The fae folk, yeah. And
And by the way, I just wanted to mention that Christopher O'Brien is having difficulties with intense thunderstorms in his area. So,
Todd, yeah, I've been trying to message you. I'm in the middle of a.
So we're waiting. We're hoping that clears up for Christopher O'Brien. We may have to actually go the phone route, which would be okay.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
I have a weekly talk with a researcher that I'm working on stuff with, and I wasn't able to get him to the message before he called that I was doing a live thing.
No worries. Hey, this is just footloose and fancy free here.
Yeah. So anyway, it's with the Tuatha thing. That's what I think. I think you had this other civilization comes from somewhere else. They demonstrate their power. Once that's demonstrated, then they embrace the people who, whose land they've landed on, and they begin to teach them things. It's like the Viracocha or Quetzalcoatl thing, where they begin to teach them things to bring them up.
The gifts of civilization, agriculture.
Yeah, and as a result, like what Alexander the Great did was he would conquer a place and then he would ally with them and they would be absorbed into his army, right? And that's how, and so I think that's what happened. I think the actual Tuatha, who were from somewhere else, not the Mesopotamian lands, they did this same thing. And so the folks in ancient Ireland that were taken under the Tuatha wing and under their banner, so to speak. They were the ones who, when anthropological history likes to point out, this is all anthropology, and this was, the Mesopotamians came and defeated them, the Fomorians and all that. I think it was the very earthly, mortal, ancient Irish under the banner of the Tuatha who were the ones who were defeated. But the actual Tuatha, if you also look at the lore, talking about them going underground and disappearing for a while, there's a scholar, his name escapes me right now, but he pointed out that at the time that the Tuatha disappear from Irish lore, a very similar group doing a very similar thing appears in the Americas, according to the lore of the American native cultures, and this happens around the world. So it looks to me, this is my speculation, that these Tuatha, whoever and whatever they were, went around the world influencing cultures all over the world, but also leaving their mark in certain places. And I go into that in some depth in Secret Missions 5, because I think there have been ancient markers left in various places, and particularly in California. In fact, I argue, dating back to my Empire of the Wheel books, that the giant arrowhead here in the San Bernardino Mountains, I argue that may actually have been a landmark left behind by the Tuatha or one of their representative cultures that ended up under their banner.
Now, would I be looking for the right word? Would I be jumping the gun, I guess, if I asked you, do you think it's possible that the Tuatha and the supernatural or paranormal gods like Quetzalcoatl and those that promise to return after giving the gifts of civilization, do you think they could be one and the same?
I think there could be a connection there. A lot of people wonder if Quetzalcoatl and Viracocha and figures like that were maybe survivors of Atlantis. Whatever Atlantis was, remember, go back to my the nugget of truth perspective. Whatever this Atlantis civilization actually was, that might too have been a product of the Tuatha, these beings who arrived from this other world. And so therefore, yes, there, to me, there would be your connection between the Tuatha and the Quetzalcoatl type figures, right? These megalith builders who went around the world and, you know, took the then human civilizations that were there and taught them things. This, of course, ties the Tuatha possibly to the whole biblical stuff about the fallen angels. Remember, there's this war in heaven. What is heaven but the cosmos, possibly? There's this war in the cosmos, and the losers, what? They're villainized, they're demonized, right? Within the lore and scripture after that. But when we look at them, what do they teach? What do Semjaza and Kokabel and these other named fallen angels teach mortal humans? Teaches them agriculture, teaches them astronomy, teaches them how to make weapons, teaches them warfare, teaches all sorts of these cultural things, like, they taught the women how to paint their faces. You got to throw in that sin stuff in there when you're villainizing. And that could make people very uncomfortable, because could the story of the fallen angels that we learn in Sunday school or temple or whatever, could the story of the fallen angels actually just be the version written by the winners of a conflict?
Right.
Which makes it scary, because then you're thinking, oh, okay, that goes back to what the Gnostics think about the demiurge and the devil actually being the good guy, right? I mean, there's that possibility.
Well, there's the horned god in the paganistic tradition.
Yeah. And
he's just one of the gods.
Yeah, it gets kind of weird. I think Chris was trying to respond there.
Yeah, he's trying to break in. He's having some really serious problems with the thunderstorms and the technology. So,
oh, yikes!
I wanted to ask you: Are you cool to go another 45 minutes?
Well, actually, no. Probably about another 15, if that's okay.
Okay. We'll do our best here with Chris. So let me get to the lightning round, Walter.
Sure.
What is breaking the butterfly on the wheel worship of Hecate, and what is the butterfly configuration?
Well, the butterfly in the wheel thing, that was part of the Catholic veneer that was laid over Hecate. And it was an interesting way to graft the certain biographical details of the actual historical real world Hypatia of Alexandria onto this fake bio of this totally fictional St. Catherine of Alexandria. And basically, in the legend of St. Catherine of Alexandria, she lives in Alexandria, Egypt, and the king or the emperor, whatever he is, he wants her for his wife. She refuses him, and he puts her in prison. And so she's, this martyr. And anyway, they decide they're going to execute her. The authorities do. And they're going to execute her on what was a very common means of torture and execution back then. And it was literally the wheel. It was this big wheel. And they'd strap you across it and break your limbs. And it's just,
It's like the rack.
Yeah, kind of like the rack. Well, when they put her on the thing and proceeded to do this to her, the wheel itself broke. And so, but the theme is that she's just such a gentle soul that she's a butterfly. And, they put this butterfly on the wheel. They're going to break this butterfly over the wheel, but the wheel itself breaks because she's so holy and pious. And
interesting.
And that's really what the basic story is. But here's the thing. Hecate's symbol is the wheel. That was their way of saying, see, the pious, good Christian girl, the wheel of Hecate breaks asunder under her piety, right? Her perfect innocence and all that, her perfect faith and everything. And was
this is who is eventually, as you said, glossed over to be St. Catherine of Alexandria.
Yeah, this is the fake bio, that the story, the legend that the church just created. to hopefully replace Hecate. And I mean, there over the centuries there were churches and groups and all sorts of sites dedicated to this Saint Catherine of Alexandria, and they admit in one of the sources I found it in was the New Catholic Encyclopedia, and eventually the church admitted that there is there's no validity to the authenticity of the life of Saint Catherine of Alexandria was a real person or ever existed. So they eventually, in modern times, admitted that this was just a syncretic fabrication.
Interesting.
And, but yet, what's interesting is how Hecate. It's almost like Hecate said, "Okay, all right, Vatican, I'll use this identity and still interact." Because, Joan of Arc knew her as Saint Catherine of Alexandria, Saint Catherine of the Wheel. And, so it's very interesting stuff. It can be.
And if Joan of Arc had her sword, maybe she wouldn't have been burned to death.
Well, she probably wouldn't have been captured, perhaps, to begin with.
Yeah.
When she was captured, it was because we can infer that it was because, but at the time she was captured, it was the first time she did not have that special sword with her. And now here's the thing about her being burned. Think about, we have stories, people don't like to think about them too much or talk about them too much, but more often than you realize, there's these stories of people who encounter the other beings, the entities and such, and it doesn't end up well for them, right?
Right.
It very often, how many times do we have stories of religious martyrs who were being guided by God or the saint or the disembodied voice or spirit, and they end up being persecuted big time, tortured, executed, that kind of thing. So as glorious as it may seem to have this interaction with these beings, a lot of times it doesn't end well, and we do see some of that even in our community with UFO history. Look at Morris Jessup, and what happened to him. Some people say he was murdered, but the story is he committed suicide. Either way, his story did not
James Forrestal or Captain Thomas Mantell.
Yeah, all of that. Well, I don't put Mantell in that. I think that was a different kind of thing. But yeah, Forrestal, or look at, I think John Keel before he stepped away from the Mothman stuff. As
Jim Moseley would say, those that got shockingly close to the truth.
Yeah, anyone that got Albert Bender, remember the weirdness that happened.
He stepped away. Yeah.
Yeah, it's either you step away.
Time.
Or bad things happen, and look what happened to Joan of Arc. All she did was what she was told. And now what happened to her was the product of insidious and nefarious behavior on the part of people, specifically the church at that time. So do you blame Hecate, Saint Catherine, or is the shame on the people who tied her up and lit the fire? That's where I put the blame.
I think it's almost always on the part of the latter. Yeah. So last question.
Sure.
And then we'll let you go. I appreciate your extending your time with us. What will Secret Missions 5 be about?
Secret Missions 5 is what I've borrowed a term from my friend Joseph Farrell. It's a necessary book. What do I mean by that? I've written the first 4 books in the series have been about individuals who I focus on, but there are gaps in history between these individuals, even though I think they were all looking for basically the same things. So what I decided to do was, it was time after finishing the Napoleon book, because I start with Juan Cabrillo, then I go to Burton and Bierce, and then back to Napoleon. I thought, well, maybe it's time to give a richer look at the context of that span of history between the 16th century with Cabrillo and on into the early years of the 20th century with Bierce. So what I do is I try to provide a little bit more of the context within what what the book is, what the previous 4 books are about, and also provide more detail, more possible fleshing out of the ideas that I had already visited in the previous books. Kind of where I had stopped at one point, I take it beyond that point, for instance, with my Cabrillo hypotheses. And I also show where there is, there are connections and overlap between the 4 figures that I've already covered. So it's really just kind of, and what I mean by necessary is it's not about any one person. It's going to be a lot of data thrown at the reader.
It's filling in the details.
It fills in the details, and it doesn't have some grand question that it answers. It just presents to you more context, so that if you haven't read those books, it'll make the read on those richer. But then if you continue, as I continue with the series, as you go forward, you'll better understand why I'm looking at the people I'm looking at. And I think the people who really like the series, I think, are going to love this book. And those who aren't familiar with the series, this might be a really good introduction to go back and read those books. So, I started the book and wrote about a third of it back by the summer of 2019, and then I got diagnosed with cancer and was dealing with all that, and then we had 2020 hit, and so I'm going through chemo during the COVID quarantine and blah blah blah. Everybody had a year in 2020.
By the way, congratulations again for whooping its ass.
Thank you. Well, my doctors did that, so yeah. But thanks. It's all good. I've been all clear in my checkups and stuff. But I had to get back and finish that book, so I'm real excited. I did 2 shorter books, really short pamphlet-sized books during that time. But Secret Missions 5 is my first full length of my normal length books that I will have completed in the last 2 years. So I'm real excited to get this one out there, because this is the book that gets me back on track where I was, before all the drama.
I'm excited to read it.
So
I'm
excited to get it out there to people, definitely.
A really good read. Please plug your YouTube channel, and where can we find other of your stuff online?
Okay. The only place you can get my books is at lulu.com. Remember, Lulu is not a publisher. They're just a printer and distributor. I've been a publisher since 2002. I make the editorial publishing decisions, but my books are only sold print on demand through lulu.com, because I'm a small press guy, and Amazon's not good for small press guys. Don't look on Amazon for my books.
Lulu.com. What about ebooks or Kindle?
I don't do Kindle, because I had a Kindle book turned into a PDF, and it messed with my income for about 6 months, so I had to yank my books off Kindle. It's just not a safe choice. But lulu.com, put in my name, and you can find the books I've written and the other ones that I've published other than my own. Again, lulu.com, print on demand. It's worth the wait.
I'd rather read a print and paper book anyway.
Yeah, that's what I do. I have my weekly live stream, plus, because I did a 3-hour one last night, as you know, at the Walter Bosley channel at YouTube. Okay, the Walter Bosley channel. Easy to find.
Easy enough.
Yeah, and I have an Instagram account where I post pictures of my model building and stuff related to promotional things with books and just whatever, travels and whatever I do, activities. And I'm also at Facebook. And, you can contact me at those places. And, I have a blog, empireofthewheel.blogspot.com, which sometimes I go a long time without posts there, but I do keep it up. And there are some really interesting articles that I've posted on there as well. So there you go. I think that's all of it.
All right. Well, thanks again, Walter Bosley, for being on Into the Fringe.
Thanks
I really appreciate your being with us, and go well the way you go.
Thank you so much, Gil. Thanks for having me on, and I look forward to doing this again.
All right. Sounds good.
All righty. Have a good night.
See you next time.
There we go.
All right. And From 1992 to 2002, Christopher O'Brien invested hundreds of unexplained events in Colorado's San Luis Valley. His investigative work is chronicled in his Mysterious Valley books, and his field investigation of UFOs, cattle mutilations, crypto creatures, haunted sites, etc., has produced one of the largest databases of unusual occurrences from a single geographic region. Today he is monitoring a sophisticated multi-sensor surveillance setup called the UFO DAP in a groundbreaking effort to scientifically monitor ongoing anomalous activity in this remote region. O'Brien's work has been featured on over 90 TV show segments, including Ancient Aliens, Inside Edition, Extra, Strange Evidence, and he has co-produced the film It Could Happen Tomorrow, the winner of 2 2012 EBE Film Festival Awards. His latest book, Stalking the Herd, is considered to be the most comprehensive book ever written addressing the complicated cattle mutilation mystery. So if you'll give me one moment, we will hook up to Christopher O'Brien. Hello, Chris. Can you hear me? Let me try that again. Chris, can you hear me? He is having some very serious problems with the thunderstorms in his area. We'll give it another go. Hello, Chris. Christopher O'Brien. Do you copy? Over. Evidently not. Let's see. Outer bands are generating thunderstorms, plus we have incoming solar storms. I had 4G earlier and problems making a local call. Let's see here. I apologize. One moment. All right, let's see. Mr. O'Brien, can you hear me? Christopher O'Brien, do you hear me? Over. Hello, sir. Mr. O'Brien, are you receiving? Over. We are continuing to have technical difficulties. I apologize. We will make it one way or the other. Christopher O'Brien, do you read me? Over. Well, we are continuing to experience technical difficulties. Thank you, John McDouglas. Appreciate your patience. Looks like he's trying to come in through StreamYard. Thank you, Hong Kong Fooey. I only wish we had him for the entire time. This was Walter's second appearance on Into the Fringe, and as he mentioned, he shall return. So we are going to go over some elements of what makes Chris's research so interesting. Hello, Mr. O'Brien. Do you read me over? Hello, hello. He's trying, folks. There is some really serious weather going on. Well, kind of all over the planet, but eastern seaboard is deluged with hurricane storms, tornado warnings, very serious thunderstorms, all kinds of stuff, all manner of sunspots, X-flares, you name it. So we are sort of in the grips, in the throes of technical difficulties. But I am glad that we have a patient audience willing to wait until our technical difficulties are solved. So, try again. Hello, Mr. O'Brien. Do you read me over? Again, I appreciate your patience. Hello, Chris. Do you read? Over.
God, I haven't had this much of a problem connecting. Are you even there?
I'm here.
Oh, good. Sorry about that. We've got bad thunderstorms. We had a big solar flare 4 days ago. It's a perfect storm.
It is, so to speak.
I have Edna coming right at me.
Can you hear me okay?
Or Elsa. Say again?
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right. So let's go ahead and get right into it. I've already delivered your introduction. That was about 15 minutes ago.
Yeah.
Tell us about the hotspot window areas and why is the San Luis Valley in South Colorado and North New Mexico so active?
That's a very good question. One that I've been trying to scratch my head bald for 25, 30 years to come up with an answer. I think I'm probably further away from an answer than I was when I first started. I'm more confused now than I was back then.
Yeah.
But seriously. I mean, I've discovered so many more potential answers that just complicate everything. And it's the more you know, the more you realize that you don't know squat.
Yeah.
So, that's a perfect, probing journalistic question, which I can't answer. I really don't know what's going on. I think it has something to do with the geophysical properties of the area, just like it does in other hotspot sort of window areas. I think it has something to do with, there's things that kind of hint around that it's special by looking at the traditional Native American knowledge and traditions that mention sacred sites and other things within their culture. And it is a really special area in that it's the only place in North America where three regional groups of Indians overlap. You have the Plains Indians coming, the Comanche, the Arapaho, all the Lakota, Dakota, the Crow, all the northern tribes would go there in the summer, the Kiowa. And then you had the Great Basin Indians, the Paiute, the Ute.
Have you ever heard of the Kansa Indian tribe?
Yes.
But they don't factor in.
I don't know. I don't know much about them. I don't think they factor in this particular equation. But basically, when you have a place that's considered sacred by, in the case of the San Luis Valley, we can kind of figure about 13 different tribes would go there and had some sort of tradition. The Southwestern Indians, the Dene, the Apache, and the Navajo, they have the strongest traditional kind of equating specialness to the San Luis Valley with the Cisnagini, the sacred mountain of the east, where all thought originates. That's the Blanca Peak Massif, that is 514ers. It's on the eastern side of the valley, on the only way out of the valley from going west to east towards Walsenburg. And the southwestern Indians, of course, would include the Pueblo Indians that come up the Rio Grande to Taos, which is the Iwa, and then the Southern Ute and the Hickory Apache. It's a very sacred area, and I think that's something that really needs to be factored in to anybody's examination of these hotspot areas. It's not all hard science and data gathering and statistical analysis and sociological work. It's looking back, anthropologically, and looking back into the traditional, the traditions that have sprung up from the indigenous peoples, and I think that's a very important key element. And of course, if it has all those things, it's geophysically interesting for whatever reason. It has a tradition that goes back thousands of years of specialness, and waves of unusual events and a variety of unusual creatures, synchronicities, weird weather, aberrant social behavior. If you have all those things together, then you're definitely going to find the government. They'll be interested. They'll have a presence nearby. They'll be trying to expand their presence further into the area. And this goes for other places besides the San Luis Valley. But the San Luis Valley, I think, is really the ultimate sociological petri dish. And I've been doing quite a bit of work over the last 30 years. I've been doing a lot of digging.
There's plenty of other window areas as well.
Oh, yeah, many. They're all over the world.
Yeah. Last time you were on, we talked quite a bit about the cattle mutilation mystery. One thing we didn't get to was this. From the 1967 Snippy the Horse case to 2011, 95% of all mutilation cases took place east of the Rockies, but recently there have been a dozen or more cases in Oregon, some in Northern California. Why do you think these cases have suddenly begun west of the Rockies?
There's been some in Idaho and Wyoming as well, but the only thing that really makes sense to me and to David Perkins, who came up with the theory that he came up with a correlation that areas that experienced high concentrations of cattle mutilations, like in the northeastern part of Colorado, Weld County especially, and then into southwestern Nebraska, and then further south in western Kansas. These are some of the hardest hit areas, the Front Range of Colorado. And this is also where we find the highest concentrations, or some of the highest concentrations, I should say, from where 100 above ground nuclear bomb tests, all the fallout that was carried by prevailing westerly and southwesterly winds from the Nevada test site, they spread over the upper to mid Great Plains.
Right.
And that's where we, downwind and downstream of uranium mines, nuclear power plants, weapons enrichment facilities, national labs, places where they create radioactive materials for medicine. If you go downwind and downstream of those locations, you'll find a high concentration of cattle mutilation. So, if that's the case, then in the 70s, when this thing was really going full-blown, 8 states in one night, I think it's a high.
Wow.
October 75. Maybe they did their study. They're going with David Perkins' theory about environmental monitoring, which is why they would go in and mutilate cattle in places that had a high concentration of radioactive isotopes. They would go in and test these animals against control samples from more pristine environments. And if that's true, then it would make sense that we would start to have mutilations west of the Rockies, which up until recently has been pretty rare. We did have cases in Idaho. We did have horse cases for some reason in Washington. Some cows. Some cases in eastern Oregon, but not many that we know of. This is back in the 70s and 80s.
Right.
And then down into Northern California, we didn't have any except around that big nuclear power plant. Get the name of it. It's the one that was in China Syndrome, the movie. There were some around there. But statistically, I think your 95% is a little high. It would probably be 90%, I would say, of all mutilation cases happen west of the continent or east of the Continental Divide, and very few happen west. Well, what do we have going on right now? We have the most catastrophic radiological event that's ever occurred since, during the modern era. We may have had a natural one in Africa that could have been pretty intense, but in terms of a nuclear event, with the escape of radiation into the environment in 2011, April 2011, we had Fukushima.
Mm-hmm.
And all that radiation during those initial 4 days drifted across the Pacific and hit California, Southern Oregon, Washington,
Mm-hmm.
and then came across, and the Rockies kind of split it. Some went up into Canada, and other portions of it kind of circled around, hit Southern California, and then Nevada, Southern Nevada, and then into Arizona and New Mexico. And isn't it interesting that now we've had, since 2015 or 2014, within 3 or 4 years, mutilations started happening where they really weren't, expected. They started happening on the West Coast. Now, that bolsters David's theory about the environmental monitoring downwind and downstream of where we utilize uranium.
Right.
And Fukushima is the most important covered-up news story of the early 21st century. This could be an extinction-level event once you play out all the impacts that it's going to have. It's taking away the food source of millions and millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people. And, I would think long and hard before I would dive into a generic can of tuna.
Yeah. It's created a dead zone in a great deal of the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah, that and the Pacific Gyre, which has a billion tons of plastic particulate. And all these whales that have been beaching themselves in California the last month or so.
That I hadn't heard about.
Yeah. Yep.
So,
the reason whales are coming into estuaries to get away from the salt water. Of course, they have a problem in they stay kind of in the areas where the salt water is diluting the seawater, but it's really how would I put it? It's an ill wind or an ill tide that blows or flows no one good.
Right. Last time you were on, we talked about Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, also known as subacute spongiform encephalopathy. What is the correlation between eating beef and the eventual onset of dementia or Alzheimer's, and how much have diseases like Alzheimer's gone up in the last 20 years, and why?
Yeah. Wow, that gets into a huge conversation. prion disease, if you will, is it's a very interesting conundrum. It's like an Escher painting. Misfolded proteins impacted by prion disease. Misfolded proteins that cause other proteins to misfold, and then they end up creating holes, like stretching taffy, and holes appearing. It creates holes in nerve tissue in the brain. And then once you start to interrupt synaptic function, and the messages can't be sent effectively and efficiently to the brain, eventually you end up forgetting to tell yourself to breathe or to have your heart beat, or other crucial metabolic functions, and that's all from the holes that are appearing in the nerve tissue, and you stumble around. You don't have a sense of balance. You can't talk. You start to babble, and we call it in society, we call that dementia.
Mm-hmm.
You can't remember anything, and we've had about a 5,000% increase in dementia deaths in the past 30 years. And of course,
how big an increase?
5,000.
Uh-huh.
Autopsies aren't done with people that are, the cause of death is dementia or Alzheimer's, unless they're part of a study. So most of these deaths go by the wayside. They label it and they let it go. There's a strong possibility that many of these deaths could be from prion disease, or Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, which is mad cow disease in people. It's like chronic wasting disease is mad cow disease in deer and elk. Scrapie is mad cow disease in sheep. It's all misfolded proteins that are 1,000 times smaller than the smallest virus. And what the conundrum is what's the definition of a life form? It's very simple. It can procreate, and you can kill it. If it's alive, you kill it, right? Well, prions you can't kill. You can stop them from misfolding, but you can't kill them. Even if you burn them with 2,500 degrees of heat, some of the prions will die, but some will remain, unharmed. So that's really troubling.
It's difficult to get rid of those little buggers.
If a surgeon does, a dentist does surgery on somebody with prion disease, he doesn't have any idea that they have it, and he puts his dental tools into an autoclave, which is how they sterilize their instruments, and he uses it on somebody else. Those prions, most of them are still there.
Right.
Sure, the autoclave will kill some, but most of them are still there. That's how resilient they are. So is it a life form? I mean, the only way that you can really kill it is, and you can't really kill it. All you can do is kind of stop it. Make it stop misfolding other proteins. So, it's that weird sort of slightly gray area between life form and...
In the same way that a virus isn't really alive?
No, a virus is alive, absolutely. It's a living thing. It is unto itself. The proteins that become misfolded are somehow impacted by prions, which are the already misfolded proteins. The Nobel Prize for Medicine was given to Daniel, who was it? I forget his name, but Kirshner or something. I think he got it in '99, And that's when they realized that they shouldn't be selling the bone ash of 4.5 million cows that were cremated in England, and they started sending the bone ash around the country, around the world, selling it, 70 countries. And then they realized, with Stanley Kusner's work, that the prions could still be alive, and then they stopped the selling process. But it was a little bit too little, too late.
Right.
So you got to read Stalking the Herd. I mean, I go through all this, and of course, Colm Kelleher, who was the managing director for the National Institute of Discovery Sciences, Robert Bigelow's outfit that owns Skinwalker Ranch. Colm wrote a really good book that I recommend highly. Like, I mean, it disappeared without a trace. Very few people read it. It's called Brain Trust. And the guy's a microbiologist, and he draws direct links between the outbreak of prion disease in Canada and I think in the United States, if I remember, and then the ensuing wave of cattle mutilations. Evidently, somebody knew what was going on, and they were very interested in finding out how widespread it could be. We're talking maybe some sort of branch of the medical establishment in the government, CDC, National Institute of Health, or we could be talking big beef. Maybe big beef had scientists that were going around and trying to find other cattle in areas where mad cow was being detected. Maybe it was big beef.
And just for scale, how big is the beef business in the U.S. and what is its impact?
It's the largest income producer in agriculture. Okay, it generates more money, more cash than any other sector of agriculture. And it's also, politically, they are incredibly strong. You have these, Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, Kansas, Nebraska. These places have a lot of clout politically, even though they don't have that many people there. And, I mean, remember what happened to Oprah? She had the mad cowboy on, the guy that was sold all his cows and was trying to warn the world about mad cow disease.
She said she'd never eat another hamburger again in her whole life.
Yeah, she blurted out at one point, boy, I'll never have another hamburger again. The next morning, she had a huge brief on her desk, a lawsuit from the beef industry for $2 billion. And she beat it. She was able to establish, First Amendment rights. I forget what the argument was, but it cost her $1 million.
But because she was Oprah.
Just because she said that one sentence.
But not every Tom, Dick, and Harry would be able to overcome that kind of a lawsuit.
Well, I mean, they didn't have 15 million housewives watching every day. So, that's why anytime I talk about this subject, I say, I eat beef. I love beef. I feel guilty every time I eat it. And I only eat grass-fed, local beef. I don't eat very much of it. It's like a real special occasion. It's like how many times you drink champagne in a year. I'm trying to be, I talk the talk, but I'm trying to walk the walk too. But I love beef. I'm not going to tell anybody not to eat it, but I will tell you, do not eat industrialized beef protein. Beef that is conglomerated, along with pork and chicken as well, into a mass that you can't really determine how it got there and what's in it. A single McDonald's hamburger could have up to 1,000 different animals represented in it. They admit that it could be 100, but they just pulled a zero off. Industrialized beef protein is potentially deadly. Prion disease is 100% fatal. Creutzfeldt-Jakob's, mad cow, scrapie, chronic wasting disease, 100% fatal. sometimes the symptoms don't show up for decades.
It's like
30, 40 years.
the new Black Death.
20-year vegetarians in England have died of Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease because they caught it in the 80s when they had the huge outbreak in England.
Right.
You can't get to the Red Cross if you spent more than 6 months in the United Kingdom for like 20 years. I think it's 80 to 95, I think. 80 to 98, I forget, whenever the thing ended. They went 20 years back. Said if you were there in England, you can't get blood. To this day. So, this is some conspiracy theory that, people with nothing better to do have dreamed up. This is Nobel Prize winning medicine and investigative journalism that's
right.
going on. So, I don't want to sound like some sort of kook, but at the same time, I think everybody has a right to know.
Yeah, it's a very serious issue. In Stalking the Herd, you postulate that if average Americans had to take a 3-day class to obtain a license to buy meat, to educate them in the entire industrialized livestock process, immediately a sizable amount of the population would become instant vegetarians.
Half the people in the country would instantly go vegetarian.
Why is that?
Absolutely. Well, I had a number of kind of part-time jobs when I was in high school. And one of them was every 4 months I'd go for 3 nights, sometimes 4. I get paid $20 an hour off the books. Now it's back in the mid-70s. And I would go into these immense chicken barns with 500,000 chickens. And we would go sit down, grab 4 in one hand by the leg, grab 4 in the other hand, and walk up to the semi-truck that's back in there, hand them to the guy, and he'd stuff them in the crates to go to the slaughterhouse.
Mm-hmm.
After about the 3rd time that I did it, I decided to do an experiment and see if the chickens knew that they were
on their way out,
being taken. And I forget what it was. I think it was psilocybin. I did, a real hefty dose of cubensis mushrooms, and I had conversations with them. I mean, they all basically did the same thing, and if you tuned into them, you could actually, I had conversations with many chickens that night, and I never went back after that because they knew what was going on. And I also, the time before, 4 months before that, I had said, hey, I'd love to see what happens to these chickens, once you unload them from the semi. And, these tens of thousands of chickens. And so I went, and I saw the whole process of how they process chickens. And I've seen how they process beef by a rancher on his own ranch, slaughtering and butchering and rendering his own animal for the family, to going up and trying to sneak into the super, the huge industrial plants up where the most cattle mutilations, the highest concentration of cattle mutilations happen, is now where they're mutilating cattle, tens of thousands a day, one every second.
Wow.
So if the average person has seen what I've seen, they would not have to be in a place of denial about that, chopped meat on styrofoam with plastic over it. Because if people had to go to a class for 3 days and get a license to eat livestock or chickens, if you had to do that,
You think half of them would fail?
but I would think a conservative estimate would be 50% of people would be so horrified and feel so guilty that they wouldn't eat meat.
After the Reagan administration allowed the consolidation of the 5 major meatpacking firms, the top 4 went from slaughtering 21% of the nation's cattle to 84%. In 1968, McDonald's, the largest purchaser of beef, bought ground beef from 175 local suppliers. A few years later, McDonald's reduced that number to 5. We can safely assume that large consolidated meatpacking companies are not using cattle mutilations to scare off the remaining small private ranching operations, right? Or can we?
I think at one point, in the end of the 70s and into the 80s, that some big unscrupulous ranching concerns who were dealing with small-time, family ranchers who weren't selling their 500 acres. Hell no, I'm not going to sell my land. And so, 70 to 80% of those small ranches are gone now. In their place, as you mentioned, is a consolidation of these super concentration camps for cattle, where all sorts of disease and infections and overflow of effluent goes out, and you have E. coli outbreaks in neighboring spinach farms, and it's really a nasty business. And cattle are besides humans, of course, cattle are by far the most detrimental life form on the planet. The way they're being managed, cattle should be going across the land like buffalo in the old days. They shouldn't be kept in one place to shit and eat and piss right there, along with 100,000 of their bovine relatives. All beef cattle, basically here in this country, you can genetically trace them back to 80 animals in northern Iran about 12,500 years ago. That's how narrow the actual gene pool is. As a little factoid, you remember that when you're on Jeopardy next time. Anyway, it's I digress, but
how seriously has animal agriculture impacted the environment and the larger world around us?
Well, they're one of the largest sources of freshwater pollution, one of the largest sources of the creation of deserts, desertification. They are the second largest natural emitter of ozone-depleting gases. Cattle farts and belches, which are about every 2 or 3 minutes, a cow farts or burps. And when you got 1 billion of them farting and burping, that's many millions of tons of methane, which is way more detrimental to the atmosphere than
CO2.
And I think cows, I've seen a figure somewhere that cows equal, if you added up the CO2, carbon monoxide coming out of the industrial West, cars, factories, coal plants, all that, and factored it against the much more concentrated methane produced by termites is the number one natural source. And the second one is cattle. And, just in the fact that more countries are becoming affluent and wanting to show that they're affluent by eating a steak, eating a hamburger. These are prestige things in Africa and India.
Japan.
Maybe not India. Japan, right? Kobe beef. Like what, $20 a pound? If you can even find it. here in this country.
Yeah.
So, as more and more countries become affluent, they want to have the steak and the hamburger, and so that's just going to put more and more pressure on the the husbandry folks to go ahead and produce more and more and more cows. I mean, you know who what country is the largest exporter of cows?
No.
India, because they don't eat them.
That's interesting.
And I've never found a single case of a mutilated Zebu style
Brahman cow.
Steer. The famous sacred white cows of India with the hump and the two little curved horns. That they're allowed legally to wander through your house, or shit on your floor. Just do what they want, basically, and you can't do nothing. And if you harm a cow, you're in trouble.
Holy cow!
They have nursing homes for cows. When cows are born and their mothers die, there's Indian women that wet nurse them.
Wow.
And it's interesting that sacred cow, literally sacred cow, one of the purest breeds on the planet, has never been found in a mutilated condition, ever. And there's millions of Brahmas and around the world, millions of them, tens of millions. I've never seen a single Brahma ever reported as mutilated.
Can you give us a partial list of products and categories?
If somebody can prove me wrong, I would love it. If somebody can find a case, I got a secret prize for you.
Okay. Can you give us a partial list of products and categories that utilize, quote, spare cattle parts?
I don't have time for that. It's probably over 1,000.
What are spare cattle parts?
All the stuff that we don't eat. Everything is utilized.
Stuff that goes into bologna?
Alaska and Wales, they use everything. I mean, we make glue, oils, lubricants, cosmetics, gelatin capsules.
Industrial solvents.
Everything. I mean, it's just hundreds and hundreds of product types that utilize bovine biology.
Okay, let's take a left turn, or in this case, a right turn. Tell us about Nixon's war on cancer and the implications it has had since.
It was garbled at the beginning of your sentence. What?
Tell us about Nixon's, quote, war on cancer and the implications it has had since.
I don't know. That's too big. That's kind of out of my purview there. I don't know. I didn't even know he declared a war on cancer. Good for him if he did, but it didn't do much. I think if you're an angry person and you have unresolved anger issues, you are way more likely to get cancer.
Mm-hmm.
If you are at peace with yourself and you have a well manicured wah, you tend not to produce rampant growth of cells that are taking over everything. To me, that's a manifestation of anger issues, some sort of unresolved repression of being able to, actually experience your emotions, repressed emotions, and especially anger. I think is all the tough guys in Hollywood: John Wayne, Steve McQueen, you go down the list. They all died of cancer.
Mm-hmm. Probably didn't help that they were shooting in the areas where they had blown off atomic bombs.
He was there within weeks of like a series of. In fact, it may have even been there when they lit one off. That Terrace Bova was the movie, and everybody sees it. And where who else? I think John Wayne. There was a bunch of them that all died of cancer.
Is there a revolving door between Monsanto and political corruption in the U.S.?
Yes, and there's a revolving door, in the FDA and the drug companies and anything having to do with the Department of Agriculture. There's always people that are coming in from the big conglomerates that are. They serve first. They serve on a board and kind of run things a little bit in their own little purview in the corporation, and then they serve, as an elected lobbyist or an appointed lobbyist in the government, and then if they do a good job, they go back to the private sector and get an even better job.
Right.
As a lobbyist, kind of. Helping out your replacement, that sort of thing. It's a corrupt. There's some real nepotism going on. There's institutionalized good boy networks and winking and elbowing and nodding. And it's all. George Carlin said it best. They're part of a big club, and you ain't a member.
That's right. Take us through a quick chemistry class. What is RGBH, and what is the impact of RGBH and antibiotics on the animals we eat?
RGBH is a growth hormone. I forget what the number is. I think 80% of the antibiotics used in this country go into cattle. And I think
wow.
60 or 70% of the growth hormones go into various livestock. Cattle get all the antibiotics because they're standing in a foot or 2 foot of urine and feces.
Mm-hmm.
And they have to pump them full of growth hormones so that they grow faster and put on weight quicker, so they're not in that toxic environment. And they have to pump them full of antibiotics to make sure they don't get sick before they get processed.
And that helps create superbugs.
Well, it helps create superbugs, and it's also why little girls at 8 or 9 years old are going, full-blown puberty.
Mm-hmm.
It's creating. It's definitely creating a wobble in the natural biological system that we have been living in for eons, and now we're warping it. Human science and knowledge are being applied with no real understanding of the implications. And the longer you go doing this, the more mutations you're going to find in the natural world, which is new bugs coming out to bite us. And cattle, because they're so close to humans in terms of especially with their hemoglobin. If you're an O negative like me, you could survive a transfusion of cattle blood.
Really?
Yeah. Cattle are 99.9 to 9 places a virtual match to human hemoglobin.
So you could give blood to anybody else, but you couldn't take blood from anybody. Is that right?
I think I can do both. I'm not sure. I'm not really a hematologist. I don't know that much about it, but I do know that the universal donor or universal receiver can survive a transfusion of cattle hemoglobin. Any other blood types would be in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just an illustration of how close cattle are. And they're 9.999 to 9 places. Pigs are to 7 places.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, we've been eating them so long that, that old adage, you are what you eat. Well,
and you think that has more to do with it than the other way around?
More to do with what?
That we're so close to them as far as their hemoglobin, it's because we've been eating them for so long rather than we're just that closely related.
Yes. And we should probably be pretty close to other animals too, deer, rabbits, but I'm sure their blood types are very, very close to ours too, within 5-6 places. I don't know. This is getting a little bit too sciencey for me, but I like to be able to speak declaratively, like I remember facts and stuff. And now I'm in a realm of I'm not really sure, so I don't quote me.
Okay. So as long as we're not getting sciencey, can you walk us through
the 99.9999999 cattle and swine number? That's rock solid.
Yeah.
By the way.
Can you walk us through the impact of inorganic compounds, dissolved gases, synthetic organic compounds, trihalomethanes, pathogens, bacteria, and protozoa that end up in our drinking water due to animal agriculture and chemical companies dumping carcinogenic compounds in our streams, rivers, and waterways?
Well, again, we're kind of steering off the path here a little bit. I really, I know some people that really are totally dialed in on this scientifically that I could refer you to on this particular subject if you want to really explore it. I don't really, all I know is that the fertilizers that are running on fields into creeks, into streams, into rivers are having a detrimental impact on the environment. And, pesticides, fertilizers, these were really impacting the environment. And, of course, if you go, let's say, to the mouth of the Mississippi, you've got a dead zone there that extends out because of all the runoff of all these, nasty-ass chemicals and stuff that we're polluting our waterways with. And whenever you hear about, we haven't really heard very much lately, but about 4 or 5 years ago, back going 20 years, there were a lot of stories about don't eat the spinach from this particular packer. You had these really nasty E. coli outbreaks, mostly in spinach, but lettuce and other crops. But what they didn't tell you was a lot of times that was breakouts from either the ponds that are associated with pig farming and or the feedlots for cattle, and sometimes that 2 feet of urine and effluent would escape. It would break through and then end up in a stream or end up in the groundwater, and then the farmer down the road, downstream, who's irrigating his crop, is irrigating the crop with E. coli.
Yeah.
Laden water. And so then you have these, these really horrendous outbreaks, and they were a lot more prevalent. I think during the last few years, I think we've either gotten lucky or we've dealt with the problem more effectively. A lot of times it's natural events. It's like when the Missouri floods, or when you have a hurricane come inland and dump 6 inches of water, and it overwhelms these cesspools in the
wastewater,
and it overwhelms the feedlots. A lot of times it's natural, and it's not somebody's fault.
Yeah.
It's an act of God, but it doesn't matter. Tell that to the relatives of some sweet little old grandma that died a horrible death of food poisoning.
I remember at the time when that spinach scare was going on, they were blaming it on, the illegal immigrants that were picking spinach.
Right.
And speaking of which, this is a rather lengthy question, so let me know if it's part of your bailiwick or not. I'm pretty sure I read this in your book. China has major safety food problems, but they're eating healthier than we are since they purchased the world's largest pork producer, Smithfield Foods, in a $5 billion takeover. After a 4-month delay, the sale was approved by the U.S. Treasury Department, and the sale was only approved after Congress deliberated over potential nutritional security issues surrounding a foreign ownership of a major U.S. food processor. This $5 billion corporate sale and takeover is the largest ever purchase of an American company by a Chinese buyer. Many are asking if the Chinese bought Smithfield to cut corners or to learn American food safety secrets. What's the real story here?
Money. The Chinese realized that there's a lot of money to be made, and Smithfield Farms. It was very. This was back in 20. I think it was 2012, 2013. It was pretty. I was pretty far along writing, talking to Herd when this story broke, and I remember thinking that that 2 billion or 3 billion Chinese are going to be right. Okay, whatever they decide, that's the way it's going to be. And everybody else is just in a place of denial culturally. The Chinese are way ahead of us. Way ahead of us. They take the art of war very seriously, and I do recommend Sun Tzu's classic to anybody that wants to really get some insight into China. They haven't been in a war in how long? Since Korea, where they contributed some troops.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They haven't spent any money overseas fighting people like we have. We've spent, I don't know, $3-4 trillion just in the past 20 years.
Oh, at least.
Yeah, at least. Of course, remember George W. Bush said, it's only going to be 500 billion, and the Iraqis are going to pay for it with their oil. Well, what happened to all that Iraqi oil in the last 20 years? How come nobody ever talks about that?
Well, that would have been a war crime to take another country's oil.
What do you think we're doing in Syria right now? Still.
Yeah.
Oh boy, don't get me started. But as far as China goes, they're going to be right. They're learning from us. They're stealing from us. They're copying us. They're doing everything they can to catch up, which they already have. They've caught up. Now they're forging ahead in space, in possibly quantum computing.
Cloning.
Obviously,
they don't have the same restrictions on biological cloning and things like that we have?
Yeah, well, they're trying to catch up, okay? All these things, the United States is way more guilty than they would like to admit. We've been doing all this stuff too. Chemical and biological weapons, I'm sure, have been, forget the Nixon treaty that Ford signed. I think all this stuff's been going full speed ahead. And I think the Chinese are they are the ultimate. We're playing chess, like a regular chess game. They're playing three-dimensional chess.
Well, they're playing Chinese chess.
Yeah, which is kind of the same thing. It's like if they play Go, we play chess.
Yeah.
Or if they play chess, it's three-dimensional. It's like Spock's chessboard with 3 levels.
Right.
And they have so many people, and from a very early age, they identify people that have certain aptitudes. And there is a very, very systematic combing through, each generation and finding out what people's aptitudes are and what they would excel in, and then they concentrate and put them into, this whole collective system that they have, which, really sort of accentuates people's talents, and at the same time puts, the fear of Jesus or the fear of some dragon in them, so that they won't make any waves and they won't,
speak out,
go all Patrick Henry on people and do another Tiananmen Square or the Hong Kong thing a couple years ago. So, in answer to your question, 2 billion Chinese are going to dictate what goes on, and we just have to figure out how to get ahead of them in the conversation or stay ahead of them, because militarily, in terms of economically, we are on the descending plane and they are on the ascending plane. So,
okay, let's get a little bit back to the cattle question. In your opinion, why should cows be grass-fed instead of grain-fed, aside from the environmental and health concerns?
Well, all that grain, number one, could feed, the 3 billion starving people on the planet, 2.5 to 3 billion. Just the grain that's fed to cows in this country, number one. And number two, cows aren't designed to eat grain. The only reason why Big Agro feeds them grain is to create as much fat as quickly as possible, to get their weight up to about 400 and something pounds, so that they could be cattle prodded down the chute to the guy with the bolt gun that kills them. And grass-fed beef is the way cows naturally exist. They wander over the land and they eat the grasses. They have they're one of the few animals that have, they're called ruminants. They can have multiple stomachs that process the grass.
They chew their cud.
Yeah, and then they belch it up into their mouths and they chew it some more, swallow it, and belches up. Grass is very difficult to get the kind of nutrition that would put the kind of weight on as quickly as grain does in a feedlot. So, if we even half that grain could feed over 1 billion people.
Yeah, I remember hearing or reading that at 1 acre of grain could feed the same amount as 7 acres of the cow-fed grain. One acre could feed a human for the same amount of time as 7 acres would feed a cow.
And how about water usage? I think it's like over 400 gallons for every pound of beef.
So tell us about the follow-up book to Stalking the Herd, and will it also be 600 pages?
David Perkins, who's been my mentor for almost 30 years, he's the granddaddy, he's the padrone of the mutilation research community. He's the first person I think Linda Howe called when she wanted to do a story on cow meat, and was her still photographer for her shoot of the Strange Harvest in '79. David's been on the case since '75.
Interesting.
Yeah, he's quite something. He's got a master's in political science from Yale. He's absolutely top shelf brilliant, and it's just such a joy to have him as such a close friend and research confidant. There's no way I would have been able to write the last 3 or so books that I've done without his real important input. And so I decided that because I didn't have enough room in the first book to analyze all that data, that we were going to do a follow-up book and then do the analysis. What we decided to do was make it fun. Instead of having it be real dry and full of facts and figures and, do
footnotes,
like a doctoral dissertation or something, we're doing it orally. And we have spent the last 7 years, hundreds of hours of conversations, dialogues, and we're covering very specific points that were brought up in Stalking the Herd. We're addressing very specific issues, but it goes way beyond the science. It goes way beyond the sensationalism and the horror into the realm of horror science, like Gaia theory, into nature of consciousness, into the role of cattle and culture, and how that the whole idea of blood and sacrifice and it's just we've been hitting it conversationally, so it's easy to read and it's fun because we're funny guys, and so we gives us a chance to make some really cool quadruple entendres and cool puns, and it's fun. It's a very grim, cut and dried blood subject. So why not, try to
well
lighten
put.
it a little bit, and also it'll be incredibly educational and informative. But David is got a wicked wit. He's funny. When the two of us get going, I mean, we've had some great recording sessions, and I travel 1,000 miles to do them.
Mm-hmm.
I would go, 400 something miles to his house in Santa Fe from Arizona, and then drive back. Or
right.
I'd hit him, during a road trip or something. So it's not like we were living next door to each other. I was almost 500 miles away, and we did this over 7 years. And part of that time, I even went all the way up to Colorado. Anyway, it's coming along. We pretty much have finished the dialogues. If we went ahead and printed them all in their unedited form, it would be, I think, around 700-800 pages. Obviously, with dialogue, the pages contain less text in order to present it properly. So we're going to winnow it down. We're in that process now where we have our chapter headings, and we're going to winnow it down and apply, edit the conversations together to address particular particular things.
Yeah.
Billion points.
David is somebody I would definitely like to have on the show at some point in the future.
Yeah, he's an amazing dude, and I stand on the shoulder of a giant.
So, a final question, although it's kind of a two-part question. Other than supply and demand, how do we know that these consolidated large beef concerns manipulate the industry via price fixing, and what are, quote, captive supplies?
Well, it's changed a lot. I did kind of look into that in terms of the subsidies issue. If we paid the real cost for a hamburger, it'd be like in Japan. 20 years ago, a McDonald's hamburger was $12, equivalent in yen. So that's how much it costs in a place that has no beef subsidies. In this country, it's really changed a lot. And like I said, the beef lobby is very powerful, and they've been able to keep the price down. Of course, if you got 50,000 head, that works. If you only got 500, that means that you're selling your heifers for $400 to $800.
Right.
When they're processed, they're worth many times more than that. 400 times to at least $800 to $1,000. So it's like double that. So, and again, I really don't know that much about this. I've never really wanted to know. I've always felt that the small rancher has been squeezed out, and the deck is stacked against him.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why 70 to 80% of small family ranching concerns that you saw in the 60s and 70s, they're gone. And they've been swallowed up by big conglomerates and industrialized cattle ranching. But let's get real. Most of the beef that's slowly transitioning in terms of the beef that we consume is transitioning to South America. And interestingly enough, in 2002, we had a huge outbreak of mutilation reports that the only number I've seen, and that was 10 years ago, was 3,500 reports. Now, since then, who knows how many. They trickle in. Obviously, we don't hear about hardly any of them that are going on down there based on what I've heard. So it's interesting that mutilations pretty much went to a complete standstill in 99 to 2000. It seemed that it just shut off. And then boom, in 2002, it took off right as they eradicated a huge outbreak of hoof and mouth disease, which is the second most feared thing in ranching.
Right.
And inoculated all the cows, and they got rid of them. And right with the last cows, within days that the last cows were being inoculated, that's where the mutilations broke out, which I find very, very intriguing.
Again, it's sort of a dead giveaway.
Yeah, so in terms of manipulating the price and stuff, it's all, a wink, wink, nod, nod relationship with Congress. And, the amount of tax incentives and being able to slowly convert your beef source to foreign suppliers, Australia, and mostly in South America.
Yeah, where they've been slashing and burning the Amazon rainforest so that they could make room for the cattle grazing land.
Right. Well, that's the the main reason why we're cutting down the rainforests in South America is to make room for more grazing land for cows. It's the single biggest rationale. And I mean that sucks.
Yeah, it's insane.
You know, for Kenya and increasingly affluent African countries and Asian countries that aren't Muslim or rather that aren't Indian, that are aspiring to be bourgeois and eat steaks. You know, the more you have people becoming affluent, the more beef, the demand for beef will go up. I mean, if you paid the actual cost of a hamburger in this country, it would be, I would estimate, it would be between $15, $16, $17.
Wow. Well, that's a mind-blowing number. Chris, I really want to thank you for...
1 billion pounds of beef, McDonald's, 1 billion pounds of beef. Every pound is almost 500 gallons of water.
That's unbelievable, even. I really want to thank you for being on the show again on short notice. Yeah, it was a good idea doing the phone thing. Where can people find out more about you and your research online?
Well, just Google me and, you know, put in cattle mutilation or UFO or San Luis Valley, plus my name. There's thousands of hits. Is
OurStrangePlanet.com still a good place to go?
Yeah, I've been kind of frozen for a while. There's a ton of information on there about my work. I haven't been able to update it recently. I'm trying to transition over to a new platform right now. So it's been a little idle, but there's a ton of stuff on there. Just start clicking around.
All right. Well, thank you again, Christopher O'Brien, for being on Into the Fringe, and we will talk to you next time.
Okay.
All right. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Take care, man.
Bye-bye. All right. And that was Christopher O'Brien, who is the world's foremost authority on cattle mutilations. So, this is Cardinal Sin, and I want to thank everybody that's been in the chat, including Sven the Naked Ninja, Ivan Ivanovich, Tessa D77, Darius Munchausen, The Wake Down, Hong Kong Fooey, and others. And thanks for being patient with our technical difficulties earlier. We will see you next time. We are perhaps changing the day of the week that Into the Fringe will be on. So stay tuned, stay safe, and we will see you next time. It's Cardinal Sin, out.